Little Red Riding Hood. The name sounds innocent, doesn't it? A little girl in a red cloak, a talking wolf, and a simple warning about not talking to strangers. But what if I told you this beloved story once dripped with blood? That it was never meant for children at all? That behind the basket of goodies and the cozy grandmother's cottage hides a trail of medieval fear, death, and something far more sinister than a hungry wolf? I'm your guide for today's mystery, so sit back and let us walk together down this dark forest path where fairy tales were born, not from magic, but from nightmares. Imagine this. It's a cold night in medieval Europe. The woods stretch endlessly, dark and silent, broken only by the howling of wolves. People are terrified of what lurks beyond their villages, not just beasts, but men who act like them. In this world, stories weren't bedtime tales. They were warnings written in blood, and among these whispered tales, one name echoed through generations: the girl and the wolf. You probably know the version where a sweet little girl visits her grandmother, meets a wolf, and nearly becomes dinner. But that's the polished, Disney-safe version, scrubbed clean by centuries of rewriting. The real Little Red Riding Hood began as something much darker. The earliest versions weren't even written down. They were told around fires, passed from peasant to peasant. In those days, people didn't tell stories to entertain their children. They told them to keep them alive. Wolves weren't metaphors. They were real. Packs roamed the forests of France and Germany, dragging away livestock, even people. So when mothers said, "Don't wander off the path," it wasn't a suggestion. It was survival. But here's the twist. The first known written version wasn't about a child at all. It was about a teenage girl, and it wasn't really about wolves. It was about men who behaved like them. Let's rewind to France. The 1600s. Charles Perrault, a wealthy writer at the court of Louis XIV, collected old folk tales and turned them into moral stories for the elite. He's the man who gave us Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. But when he wrote Le Petit, Chaperon, Rouge, the Little Red Riding Hood, he was indeed trying to make children smile. He was issuing a warning. In Perrault's version, the wolf isn't a wild animal. He's a man, smooth-talking, polite, even charming. He meets the girl in the woods and convinces her to take the longer path to her grandmother's house. By the time she arrives, the wolf has already eaten the old woman and is waiting for her in disguise. There's no heroic woodsman, no rescue. The girl climbs into bed, and that's where the story ends. With the wolf devouring her whole. Perrault adds a moral at the end, blunt and chilling. He writes that young girls, especially pretty, well-bred ones, should beware of wolves, meaning predatory men. He spells it out. These wolves aren't covered in fur. They're the kind who smile at you, offer compliments, and wait for the right moment to strike. So Little Red Riding Hood wasn't about monsters of the forest, it was about the monsters who walked on two legs. But the story didn't begin with Perrault either. He polished an even older folktale, one soaked in superstition, fear, and blood. To find that, we have to go back further, to the mountains of medieval France and Italy, during the time of the werewolf trials. Yes, werewolf trials, real events, as brutal as the witch hunts. Between the 14th and 17th centuries, thousands were accused of transforming into wolves and attacking people. Some confessed under torture, others were executed. In those days, people truly believed in shapeshifters, men who became beasts under the full moon. Imagine living in a world where every growl outside your window could be your neighbor turned into a monster. One of the most infamous cases was in 1521, the werewolves of Poligny. Two men were accused of making a pact with the devil, turning into wolves, and feasting on human flesh. They confessed and were burned alive. Tales like these spread fear through the countryside. Fear that anything wild, untamed, or different could be a sign of the devil. Now think about that when you picture our red-hooded girl walking into the forest. She was on just stepping into danger. She was walking into a world obsessed with evil disguised as ordinary life. The earliest versions of the tale reflect that fear vividly. In one from rural France, the wolf tricks the girl into eating her grandmother's flesh and drinking her blood before devouring her. Yes, you heard that right. It was pure horror. In that version, the girl is wearing a red hood, she's just a little girl. Red was added much later, but that color, blood red, became symbolic. It represented danger, sexuality, and defiance. The church saw red as the color of sin. But in pagan tradition, it symbolized transformation, the step from childhood to womanhood. So when later storytellers gave the girl a red cloak, they weren't just describing clothing. They were marking her as someone standing at the border between innocence and temptation. And that's where the story gets even darker. You see, Perrault's version ends with her death. But 100 years later, the brothers Grimm came along and changed everything. The Grimm brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm, were German scholars in the 1800s who collected oral folktales to preserve their culture. When they found Perrault's story, they softened it, but not too much. In their Rotkäppchen, Little Red Cap, the girl still gets eaten, but a heroic huntsman arrives, cuts open the wolf's belly, and saves both her and her grandmother. The message shifted from don't trust men to disobey your parents and you'll pay, but redemption is possible. And yet, even the Grimms couldn't erase the unease that lingers in this story. Why does it still feel so disturbing? Why do we still sense that something deeper is hiding beneath the surface? Maybe it's because Little Red Riding Hood isn't just one story, it's a mirror. Every version reflects the fears of its time. In medieval Europe, the wolf was literal, a symbol of wilderness and hunger. In Perrault's era, it was metaphorical, a warning against seduction and sin. In the Victorian age, it became moral, about obedience and purity. And today, when we look back, we see something timeless, the danger of innocence walking into the jaws of manipulation. But there's more, much more. Some scholars believe the story might trace back even further, thousands of years, to ancient myths. One of the oldest comes from Greece. The tale of Zeus and Lycaon was a man turned into a wolf for serving human flesh to the gods. From him comes the word lycanthropy, werewolf. That myth spread across Europe, evolving with every culture it touched. Others point to ancient Rome, where the goddess, Lupa, a she-wolf, nursed the twins, Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome. Wolves weren't just predators, they were symbols of strength, wilderness, and motherhood. So, when the story of the girl and the wolf took shape centuries later, it may have carried echoes of those ancient beliefs, the tension between civilization and nature, between trust and instinct. Let's pause for a moment. Imagine you're that girl. You've grown up hearing stories of wolves who eat people. But you've also heard that sometimes, wolves can talk, even seem friendly. You step into the woods, basket in hand. The trees close around you, and the light fades. You hear a voice, smooth, polite. Where are you going, little one? Do you run, or do you answer? That asks the question at the heart of Little Red Riding Hood, and maybe of life itself. Over time, artists and writers kept reshaping the story to fit their world. In the 19th century, Victorian illustrators painted red as delicate and graceful, a symbol of female virtue. In the 20th, she became a symbol of rebellion, girls claiming their power instead of hiding from danger. And then came film. From dark horror movies to animated versions, each retelling twists the tone. In Neil Jordan's The Company of Wolves 1984, the story becomes a dreamlike fable about growing up and facing desire. In some modern versions, Red isn't the victim at all. She's the hunter. She slays the wolf herself, taking control of her fate. But through every version, one detail never fades. The red hood, it's become more than a garment. It's a symbol burned into our culture. Red for blood, red for danger, red for transformation. Now, let us go back to the real world, to those villages where this story was once whispered in fear. Back then, forests were vast and deadly. Wolves weren't myths. They were real, tearing into livestock and travelers. Parents warned their children not to stray from the path because they genuinely might never come back. But the tale also carried another message, a moral that society wanted young girls to absorb. Stay obedient, stay pure, stay home. It's uncomfortable, isn't it? That even in a story dressed as a warning about danger, the lesson was often about control, not freedom. And maybe that's why this tale still grips us. Because even now, centuries later, we recognize the tension between innocence and experience. Safety and curiosity, control and independence. Think about it. Who really wins in the story? The girl who obeys? The one who learns too late? Or the one who rewrites her own ending? Today, we like to think we've tamed our wolves, that monsters live only in stories. But the truth, wolves have just learned to blend in better. They wear suits, hold phones, smile at you from across the room. The danger isn't always outside the village anymore. Sometimes it walks beside you. That's why Little Red Riding Hood still matters. It's not just a fairy tale. It's a timeless metaphor about trust, fear, and survival. It reminds us that innocence can be beautiful, but also deadly when it meets deception. And maybe that's why, deep down, the story never really left its medieval roots. Beneath the modern polish, you can still hear the growl of the wolf, still feel the cold wind of the old forests, still sense the warning whispered by mothers centuries ago. Don't stray from the path. But here's the twist, maybe straying is what makes us human. Maybe curiosity, even when dangerous, is what drives us forward. Without it, there are no discoveries, no growth, no stories. And yet, as every version of this tale reminds us, curiosity always comes with a price. So next time you see an image of Little Red Riding Hood, don't just think of a cute children's book. Remember the blood-soaked history behind her cloak. Remember the werewolves, the witch trials, the moral warnings, the shifting meanings. Remember that once, this story was whispered by terrified villagers huddled by candlelight, and that the Red Hood was not a fashion statement, but a symbol of life, death, and transformation. As the fire crackled and the night deepened, they would finish the tale with one final warning: beware the wolves in the forest, and the ones who wear human faces. So, my friend, that's the real Little Red Riding Hood, the blood-soaked path behind the sweet fairy tale. A story born from fear, reshaped by time, and still echoing with the same truth. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes, they knock on the door and smile. If you enjoyed this journey through Mystery Vault, make sure to subscribe and join us for more mysteries of history and the world around us.